I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, let me first thank you for convening this meeting, and also thank Ambassador Sven Jurgensen, President of the Security Council, for presenting the Council's annual report to the General Assembly. The Council adopted this year's report earlier than in previous years. While the improved timeline in the submission of the reports to the General Assembly is encouraging, the same cannot be said about the contents of the report itself. As in the past, the report provides a useful compendium of the Council's deliberations on various issues. It does not, however, throw any light on how the Council dealt with specific situations and the ways in which it reached its decisions. The UN Charter mandates the Security Council to submit annual and, where necessary, special reports to the General Assembly. This is, in fact, the Security Council's clear obligation to the General Assembly and is highlighted in not one but two articles, namely Articles 15 and 24 of the Charter. This fundamental obligation of the Council to the General Assembly should not be allowed to become a mere ritual. Mr. President, the Council's decision-making is criticized most often on account of its opacity and exclusivity. Despite recent efforts to improve transparency in the functioning of the Security Council, much of its real work takes place behind closed doors. This was not always so. During the initial years of the United Nations, the Security Council held its meetings in the open with active participation of all member states who could intervene freely on issues of concern to them. This open culture of the Council's work has been progressively eroded by the ever more frequent closed meetings which are not provided for under the Council's provisional rules of procedure. Today, non-members are not allowed to participate in even the open meetings of the Council on an equitable basis. Non-members are obliged to submit written contributions to the Council, while only the Council members participate live in the sessions. Even these written contributions by non-members are circulated as a separate compilation document and not as part of the official records of the Security Council meetings. Clearly, the Council has become more cloistered than ever before. The total absence of discussion, debate, and interaction in open Council meetings on important issues of peace and security comprises the Council's role to act on behalf of all member states. This validates our long-held and principled view that the already exclusive and elitist culture of the Council, with outcomes mostly determined by its permanent members, can be changed, not by seating new permanent members on the Council, but by enhancing its representativeness, openness, and inclusivity with decision-making through the expansion and empowerment of elected non-permanent members of the Council. Mr. President, as the Council resumes in-person meetings, it must, like the General Assembly under your leadership, ensure a judicious balance between functionality and openness. It is essential that non-members of the Council are enabled to participate effectively in its work, especially on matters of direct concern to them. No effort should be made to perpetuate the COVID-19 related restrictions in the practice of the Council. This would be a betrayal of the efforts of the Council's informal working group on documentation and the successive presidential notes 507 to induct greater transparency and equity in the Council's work. Mr. President, the closed nature of the Security Council's proceedings and the lack of transparency as illustrated in its annual report to the General Assembly contributes to disguising the reality that global tensions have grown, conflicts proliferated, and little progress has been made in addressing existing disputes and conflicts, such as the conflict over Jammu and Kashmir. The Security Council considered the situation in Jammu and Kashmir twice in 2020. It is one of the oldest items on the Security Council's agenda. Pakistan seeks a just settlement of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The February 2021 understanding reached between the Directors General of Military Operations of Pakistan and India to fully observe the 2003 ceasefire understanding along the line of control was a manifestation of our commitment to prevent a dangerous escalation and the loss of innocent civilian lives along the line of control. The UN Secretary General welcomed the positive step and hoped that this will provide an opportunity for further dialogue. A constructive dialogue is possible if India takes steps to create the necessary enabling environment, including the reversal of its unilateral actions of 5 August 2019 in violation of Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 91 and 122. Unfortunately, India persists in its policy of repression in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and in attempts to change its demography as the means to foreclose the exercise of the Kashmiris' right to self-determination, a fundamental right promised to them by the resolutions of the Security Council. The Kashmir dispute can be durably resolved through implementation of these Security Council resolutions. Until then, the grave human rights and humanitarian situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the accompanying tensions between Pakistan and India continue to pose an ever-present threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, Afghanistan stands at a historic crossroads. We hope that the Afghan parties will seize the present opportunity for reconciliation, persist with the Doha intra-Afghan peace process, and reach an inclusive, politically negotiated settlement leading to the end of hostilities and a lasting peace in Afghanistan. We hope that the international community, including the UN Security Council, will support these efforts for a negotiated settlement and restrain the role of spoilers, some of whom are engaged in sponsoring terrorism from Afghanistan to advance their strategic objectives against my country. For its part, Pakistan will continue to make all possible efforts to keep the Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process on track, promote mutual accommodation, and help to end violence and realize a durable political settlement in Afghanistan. Mr. President, the continuing tragedy of Palestine is another example of the Council's failure to secure implementation of its own resolutions and to end foreign occupation and enable the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination. Even as innocent Palestinian men, women, and children were being bombed indiscriminately or murdered in the streets and in their homes, even as the sanctity of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Haram Sharif were being desecrated, the Security Council remained paralyzed. The continuing oppression of the people of Kashmir and Palestine and the countless other conflicts afflicting the Muslim world cannot be divorced from the rising phenomena of Islamophobia and the apparent impunity with which Muslim peoples and nations have been subjected to foreign intervention, aggression, and occupation. For the past 20 years, hate and discrimination against Muslims has proliferated, even within some advanced and democratic societies. The recent terrorist attack on a Muslim family of Pakistani origin is yet another tragic reminder of the pernicious threat posed by violent ideologies of hate against Muslims. We echo the call of the Secretary General that, and I quote, "We must stand against Islamophobia and all forms of hatred now more than ever," unquote. On its part, my delegation has consistently drawn attention to this new and emerging form of terrorism. We must act against all fascist and totalitarian ideologies and groups who have weaponized hate as a political and ideological tool. As a first step, they must be called out and designated for what they are: terrorist organizations and groups. We reiterate our call for the United Nations and the Security Council to broaden the scope of the current UN Security Council sanctions regimes to include not only Muslim groups, but also terrorists inspired by these new ideologies of anti-Muslim hate and terror. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan.